The blood-soaked letter trembled in Tabitha Turner's hands as she stood frozen on her porch, the Montana sunset casting long shadows across her face. 6 months ago, she'd been a bride. Today, she was a widow. The war between the states had claimed her husband of only 3 weeks, leaving behind nothing but memories and this piece of paper that had traveled over 1,000 miles to deliver its devastating news. Ventura, Montana Territory, 1867, was supposed to be their fresh start. James had promised her a life of adventure in this rugged frontier town, nestled between rolling plains and distant mountains. Instead, she found herself alone in a half-built cabin at the edge of town, with winter approaching and grief hollowing her out from the inside. Tabitha folded the letter carefully, placing it inside the small wooden box where she kept her most precious belongings. Her wedding ring, a daguerreotype of her parents, and now the notification of her husband's death at Appomattox. The war had officially ended 2 years ago, but James had been among those who lingered, helping with reconstruction. A collapsed building had been his demise, not even a soldier's death, just a cruel accident. The next morning, Tabitha walked through Ventura's muddy Main Street, her black mourning dress attracting sympathetic glances from the townspeople. She kept her eyes downcast, avoiding their pity. The general store's bell jingled as she entered, the familiar scent of coffee beans, leather, and tobacco filling her nostrils. "Miss Turner," Mr. Holloway, the storekeeper, greeted her solemnly. "What can I help you with today?" "Just some flour and coffee, please," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As Mr. Holloway gathered her items, the door swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and heavy bootfalls on the wooden floor. Tabitha didn't bother looking up. These days she rarely did. "That'll be 35 cents, Mr. Holloway said, sliding her purchases across the counter. Tabitha reached into her small purse, counting out her dwindling coins. Her fingers trembled and 1 penny escaped, rolling across the floor toward the newcomer's boots. A tanned hand with dirt under the fingernails retrieved the penny before she could bend down. "I believe this belongs to you, madam." Tabitha glanced up briefly, meeting a pair of startlingly blue eyes beneath the brim of a dusty brown hat. The stranger was tall, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that suggested long days under the sun. His expression was one of simple kindness as he returned her penny. "Thank you," she murmured, quickly looking away and accepting the coin. "Madam." He tipped his hat and moved toward the counter. "Isaac, good to see you made it back in one piece," Mr. Holloway greeted the stranger enthusiastically. "How was the cattle drive? Long and dusty, but profitable," the man named Isaac responded. "The herd fetched a fine price in Kansas City." Tabitha gathered her purchases and hurried out of the store, the conversation fading behind her. She had no interest in the comings and goings of cowboys or cattle drives. Her world had contracted to the space between her cabin and the small plot of land where she grew vegetables, barely enough to sustain herself. The next few days passed in the same gray haze that had enveloped Tabitha since receiving the letter. She tended her garden mechanically, cooked simple meals she barely tasted, and spent evenings staring at the fire, remembering James's face and wondering how she would survive the approaching winter. On Sunday, she reluctantly dressed for church, knowing the entire town would notice if she didn't attend. Ventura's modest white chapel stood at the center of town, its bell ringing out across the valley. Tabitha slipped into the last pew, nodding politely but avoiding conversation. Pastor Whitman's sermon was about rebuilding after loss, finding strength in faith. Tabitha listened without hearing, her mind wandering to the practical concerns of her future. The small amount of money James had left was nearly gone. Soon, she would need to find work, but the options for a woman alone in a frontier town were limited. As the congregation filed out after the service, Tabitha found herself cornered by Mrs. Peterson, the blacksmith's wife, whose well-meaning concern often manifested as intrusion. "My dear, you're growing thin as a rail," Mrs. Peterson observed, eyes sweeping critically over Tabitha's frame. "You must come to dinner this week, no arguments." "That's very kind, but I insist. Tuesday at 6. The older woman patted Tabitha's arm with finality before bustling away to join her husband. Tabitha sighed, resigning herself to an evening of forced conversation and prying questions. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with a solid chest clad in a clean white shirt. "Pardon me," came a familiar deep voice. It was the cowboy from the general store. Isaac, she remembered. "My fault entirely," she said, stepping back. "Isaac Keller," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Tabitha Turner," she replied, briefly touching his calloused palm with her gloved fingers. "I know," he said, then quickly added, "small town. Word travels, of course." Everyone knew about the young widow at the edge of town. She nodded stiffly, eager to escape. "Mrs. Turner, I noticed your fence is leaning badly on the north side," Isaac said, stopping her retreat. "Winter's coming and wolves get bold when snow flies. I'd be happy to fix it for you." Tabitha studied him suspiciously. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. "I can manage," she replied. "I'm sure you can," he agreed easily. "But 4 hands make quicker work than 2. I've got time tomorrow if you'd allow it." She hesitated. The fence did need repair, and her attempts had been frustratingly unsuccessful. "I can pay you a little," she offered, dignity prickling. Isaac shook his head. "Just being neighborly, maybe a cup of coffee when the work's done." Tabitha considered his open expression. There was no pity there, just straightforward practicality. "Very well," she conceded. "Tomorrow afternoon." "I'll be there." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Tabitha wondering if she'd made a mistake. The following day, Tabitha found herself glancing repeatedly toward the road. Part of her hoped Isaac wouldn't come, sparing her the awkwardness of having a stranger around her property. Another part desperately needed that fence fixed before winter. At precisely 2 o'clock, the sound of hoofbeats announced his arrival. Isaac rode a handsome chestnut gelding, tools strapped to his saddle. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. "Afternoon, Mrs. Turner," he greeted, leading his horse to a post. "Mr. Keller," she acknowledged, wiping her hands on her apron. "The fence is this way." She led him to the north side of her property, where the wooden fence sagged precariously, several posts rotted at the base. Isaac surveyed the damage, pushing his hat back on his forehead. "I can replace these 4 posts and reinforce the others. Should hold through winter and beyond." "I have some lumber behind the cabin," Tabitha offered. "I brought better," he replied, gesturing to the long pieces of wood tied to his saddle. "Cedar, resistant to rot." For the next few hours, Tabitha watched from a distance as Isaac worked. He moved with purpose and efficiency, digging out the old posts, setting the new ones deep in the ground, and carefully securing the rails. Occasionally, he would ask for her help holding a board steady, but otherwise seemed content to work in companionable silence. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Isaac drove in the last nail and stood back to admire his handiwork. The fence stood straight and strong, a vast improvement over its previous state. "That should keep both wolves and your livestock where they belong," he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "I don't have livestock," Tabitha replied, "just me." Isaac studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "A milk cow would serve you well, provide milk, butter, cheese. Important sustenance for the winter." "I can't afford a cow," she said bluntly. "Old man Jenkins has a young Jersey that just freshened. He owes me a favor." Isaac gathered his tools. I could speak to him. Tabitha felt a flare of indignation. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Keller." "Not charity, a trade." He gestured to her garden. "Those are fine pumpkins you've grown. Jenkins has a fondness for pumpkin pie." She regarded him suspiciously. "Why are you doing this?" Isaac's expression softened. "Because surviving alone in this territory is hard enough without being stubborn about accepting help when it's offered." His words struck a chord. Tabitha had been fiercely independent since James's death, rejecting assistance out of pride and a desire to prove she could manage. But winter in Montana was merciless and her supplies were dwindling. "I'll consider it," she conceded. "Would you like that coffee now?" Isaac's smile reached his eyes. "I would, thank you." In her small cabin, Tabitha felt uncomfortably aware of Isaac's presence. He seemed to fill the space with his height and broad shoulders, yet he moved carefully, respectfully, keeping a proper distance as she prepared the coffee. "You're from back east?" he asked, accepting the steaming mug. "Pennsylvania," she confirmed. "James, my husband, wanted to start fresh after the war." Isaac nodded. "Many do. I came from Ohio myself 6 years ago. What brought you to Ventura?" "Work, initially. Signed on with the Circle D Ranch as a hand. Been working my way up since." He sipped his coffee. "Bought my own parcel last year southeast of town, building slowly." Tabitha found herself genuinely curious. "Your own ranch? Nothing grand yet. 50 acres, a small cabin, and a growing herd." There was quiet pride in his voice. "Takes time to build something worthwhile." They talked until the coffee was gone, mostly about practical matters, the approaching winter, the town's preparations, advice on winterizing her cabin. Isaac's manner remained respectful, his conversation informative rather than intrusive. When he finally took his leave, Tabitha realized with surprise that almost 2 hours had passed. "Think about that cow," he reminded her as he mounted his horse. "Winter's no time to go hungry," she nodded. "Thank you for the fence, Mr. Keller." "Isaac," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome, Mrs. Turner." "Tabitha," she found herself replying. His smile remained with her long after he'd ridden away, true to his word. 3 days later, Isaac returned with a docile Jersey cow on a lead. Tabitha had spent those days debating with herself, pride warring with practicality, before finally selecting 3 of her largest pumpkins and a jar of preserved beans as payment. "Jenkins is pleased with the trade," Isaac informed her, helping secure the cow in the small lean-to attached to her cabin. "Her name's Buttercup. She's gentle and a good milker." Tabitha approached the cow cautiously. She'd grown up in a town and had little experience with farm animals. Buttercup regarded her with large, liquid eyes, letting out a soft moo. "I don't know how to milk a cow," she admitted, embarrassed. "I can show you," Isaac offered without judgment. "It's not difficult once you get the rhythm of it." The lesson that followed was awkward at first, with Tabitha hesitantly following Isaac's instructions. Her first attempts yielded only a few squirts of milk, but Isaac's patient guidance eventually helped her establish a steady stream into the bucket. "There you have it," he said approvingly when she'd managed to get a quarter bucket on her own. "You'll be a natural in no time." The sense of accomplishment was unexpectedly satisfying. "Thank you. This will make a significant difference." "A cow's not just milk," Isaac explained. "She'll give you manure for your garden come spring, and if you breed her next year, a calf to raise or sell." The practical knowledge Isaac shared reminded Tabitha how much she still had to learn about frontier living. James had had grand plans but little practical experience himself. They'd been figuring it out together until she was left to manage alone. The next few weeks brought a subtle shift to Tabitha's routine. Caring for Buttercup required consistent attention morning and evening, imposing structure on days that had previously blended together. The fresh milk improved her diet, and learning to make butter and cheese gave her a sense of purpose she'd been lacking. Isaac stopped by occasionally, always with a practical reason, bringing a load of hay for Buttercup, showing Tabitha how to repair a leak in her roof, offering advice on storing vegetables to prevent freezing. Each visit was brief, but left Tabitha feeling less isolated. She began to look forward to the sound of his horse approaching. November brought the first snowfall, transforming Ventura into a pristine white landscape. Tabitha stood on her porch watching the flakes drift down, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. The beauty of it caught her by surprise, the first thing that had truly moved her since receiving that terrible letter. A movement in the distance caught her eye. A rider was approaching through the swirling snow, and even from a distance, she recognized Isaac's broad-shouldered silhouette. He reached her cabin and dismounted, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Wanted to check you had enough firewood before the snow gets too deep," he explained, stomping his boots on the porch. "I think I'm adequately supplied," she replied, though in truth she wasn't entirely sure. Isaac glanced toward her woodpile. "Might get you through December. I'll bring more next week." Tabitha felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, not quite happiness, but perhaps its distant cousin. "Would you like to come in for coffee? Or something stronger? The cold?" Isaac's eyes crinkled at the corners. Coffee would be mighty welcome. Inside, the cabin felt different, with Isaac seated at her small table, snow melting from his coat hung by the door. Tabitha busied herself with the coffee pot, aware of his eyes following her movements. "The Petersons' Thanksgiving dinner is next week," he mentioned casually. "Will you attend?" Tabitha poured the coffee carefully. "I wasn't planning to. Large gatherings are difficult for me now." "I understand." He accepted the steaming mug, "but good food and company might be a welcome change." "Perhaps," she said noncommittally. The thought of forced festivity made her chest tighten. Isaac didn't press the issue. Instead, he told her about his own Thanksgiving traditions growing up in Ohio, his mother's famous apple pie, his father's blessing that always turned into a lengthy speech, his brother's competitions to see who could eat the most turkey. His stories painted such a vivid picture that Tabitha found herself sharing memories of her own family holidays. For the first time in months, remembering the past brought warmth instead of just pain. When Isaac finally departed, promising to return with more firewood, Tabitha stood at the window watching until he disappeared into the swirling snow. The cabin felt emptier than before. The day before Thanksgiving, a knock at Tabitha's door revealed Mrs. Peterson, her round face flushed from the cold. "I won't take no for an answer," the older woman announced without preamble. "Isaac Keller said you might need convincing, so here I am, convincing you. Our table will be incomplete without you tomorrow." Tabitha blinked in surprise. "Isaac said that?" "He did indeed. That young man has a good head on his shoulders." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. "Grief is a heavy burden, my dear, but it grows heavier in solitude." Something in the woman's kind eyes broke through Tabitha's resistance. "What time should I arrive?" she asked quietly. 2:00, and bring nothing but yourself." With a satisfied nod, Mrs. Peterson departed, leaving Tabitha to wonder at Isaac's intervention. Thanksgiving at the Petersons proved less overwhelming than Tabitha had feared. Their home was crowded with townsfolk, but the atmosphere was one of genuine warmth. Isaac arrived shortly after Tabitha, and she found herself seated beside him at the long table. "Thank you," she murmured as Mr. Peterson began carving the turkey, "for suggesting to Mrs. Peterson that I come." Isaac's expression was carefully neutral. "I merely mentioned you might appreciate the invitation. The convincing was all her doing." The meal was the most delicious Tabitha had eaten in months: roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes swimming in gravy, cranberry sauce, fresh bread, and 3 different kinds of pie. She ate more than she thought possible, surrounded by conversation and laughter that, while she couldn't fully participate, washed over her like a soothing balm. After dinner, the men retreated to the porch for pipes and conversation despite the cold, while the women cleared the table. Tabitha found herself working alongside the other women of Ventura, passing dishes and storing leftovers. Mrs. Peterson pressed a bundle of turkey and fixings into her hands for tomorrow, and for once, Tabitha accepted the gift graciously. When it came time to leave, Isaac offered to walk her home. The snow had stopped, leaving a crystal-clear night with stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds. "Thank you for convincing me to come," Tabitha said as they walked, their breath forming twin clouds in the frigid air. "It was nice to be among people again." "The town cares about you," Isaac replied. "They just don't always know how to show it without seeming to pity you." His perception surprised her. "And you do?" Isaac was quiet for a few steps. "I lost my brother at Gettysburg." "Not the same as losing a husband, I know, but grief is grief. People meant well, but their sympathy sometimes felt like sandpaper on raw skin." The simple acknowledgement of her feelings touched Tabitha deeply. "Exactly," she whispered. They reached her cabin, the windows dark and uninviting after the warmth of the Petersons' home. "Would you like to come in?" Tabitha asked impulsively. "I could make coffee." Isaac hesitated. "It's getting late. Perhaps another time." She nodded, embarrassed at her forwardness, but Isaac's next words reassured her. "I'm heading to Helena day after tomorrow for supplies. There are some things Ventura's general store doesn't carry. Is there anything you need?" The thoughtfulness of the offer warmed her. "I don't want to trouble you." "No trouble, I'm going anyway," Tabitha considered. "There is a book, the new Louisa May Alcott. I've been wanting to read it." Isaac smiled. "Consider it done. Good night, Tabitha." "Good night, Isaac." She watched him walk away, realizing this was the first Thanksgiving since James's death that hadn't ended with her crying herself to sleep. December brought relentless snow and bitter cold. Tabitha's days fell into a routine of tending to Buttercup, keeping her cabin warm and reading by lamplight in the evenings. Isaac visited regularly, always with practical reasons, bringing firewood, checking her roof after heavy snowfall, helping clear a path to the lean-to. Each visit lasted a little longer than the last. Coffee after chores became a habit, and conversation flowed more easily. Isaac told her about his ranch, his plans for expansion in the spring, his hopes to build a proper house someday. Tabitha found herself sharing her own dreams, the garden she wanted to plant when the snow melted, her desire to perhaps start a small business selling preserves and baked goods. "You make the best apple cake I've ever tasted," Isaac told her one afternoon, accepting a second slice. He'd brought her the promised book from Helena, along with a small tin of English tea that must have cost a pretty penny. "You could sell these in town and make a good profit." The compliment pleased her more than it should have. "My mother's recipe. She was known for her baking back in Harrisburg." "She taught you well." Isaac's appreciation was genuine, without flattery. On Christmas Eve, Tabitha expected to spend the evening alone with her memories. James had died before they could celebrate their first Christmas together, and the thought of the holiday without him still ached. She was surprised when a knock came at her door just as darkness fell. Isaac stood on her porch, snow dusting his hat and shoulders, a small package in his gloved hands and a pine tree leaning against the railing. "Merry Christmas," he said, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I thought, well, every home should have a tree on Christmas. Touched beyond words, Tabitha stepped aside to let him enter. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. He propped the tree in the corner of her small front room, its fresh pine scent immediately filling the cabin. From his pockets, he produced a small bundle of candles and simple wooden ornaments. I'm not much of a carpenter, but I made these last night. Together, they decorated the small tree, attaching candles with special holders and hanging the ornament stars and hearts carved from pine. When they finished, Isaac lit the candles carefully and they stood back to admire the gentle glow. It's beautiful, Tabitha whispered, unexpected tears pricking her eyes. Not tears of grief this time, but something more complex. Isaac handed her the package he'd brought. This is for you. Nothing fancy. Tabitha unwrapped it with trembling fingers to find a finely crafted wooden box with her initials inlaid in darker wood on the lid. Opening it, she discovered a compartmentalized interior lined with soft cloth. For your sewing things, Isaac explained. I noticed your current one is falling apart. The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed her. Isaac, I didn't get you anything. Your company is gift enough, he said simply. Impulsively, Tabitha reached for a small parcel on her shelf. Actually, I did make this. I wasn't sure whether to give it to you. Isaac unwrapped the carefully knitted scarf, running his fingers over the deep blue wool. You made this. For me. The color matches your eyes, she admitted, then blushed at her boldness. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions. Isaac carefully wrapped the scarf around his neck. It's perfect, thank you. His voice was rough with feeling. They spent Christmas Eve sharing stories by candlelight, the decorated tree casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. When Isaac finally left, Tabitha felt something shift within her, a small crack in the wall of grief she'd built around her heart. January brought the harshest weather of the winter. Ventura disappeared under snowdrifts taller than a man, and for nearly 2 weeks, Tabitha's cabin was effectively isolated. She had enough supplies thanks to Isaac's foresight, but the isolation weighed heavily. When the storm finally broke, she was outside attempting to clear a path when the sound of approaching horses caught her attention. Isaac appeared, leading a second horse loaded with supplies. You're all right, he said, relief evident in his voice as he dismounted and strode toward her. I was worried when no one could get through to check on you. I'm fine, she assured him, surprised by how happy she was to see him. Buttercup and I have been keeping each other company. Isaac helped her clear paths to the lean-to and woodpile, then unloaded the supplies he'd brought: coffee, sugar, flour, and other essentials. Inside her cabin, he built up the fire while Tabitha prepared a simple meal of rabbit stew and biscuits. As they ate, Isaac studied her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. Is something wrong? She asked. No, he replied slowly. Something's right, you look different. Tabitha touched her hair self-consciously. I haven't been able to properly, not that, he interrupted. Your eyes, they have light in them again. The observation startled her. Tabitha hadn't given much thought to her appearance in months, but now she realized Isaac was right. The hollow emptiness that had stared back at her from her small mirror was gradually filling with something else. I suppose I'm learning to live again, she said softly. Isaac reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. I'm glad. The moment hung between them, fragile and charged with possibility. Then Isaac stood, breaking the spell. I should head back before dark. The trail's treacherous after sundown. Tabitha walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant for him to leave. Thank you for checking on me, and for the supplies. I'll return in a few days, weather permitting, he promised. She watched him ride away. a solitary figure against the vast white landscape, and felt the curious sensation of missing someone who wasn't dead, just absent. It was a novel feeling after months of grieving what could never return. February brought slightly warmer temperatures and more frequent visits from Isaac. Their friendship deepened as they shared stories of their lives before Montana. Tabitha learned about Isaac's family farm in Ohio, his decision to head west after his brother's death, his years working cattle drives and saving every penny to buy his own land. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her brief courtship with James, their dreams of building a life in the West. James was a dreamer, she explained one evening as they sat by her fire. Full of plans but short on practical experience. I think that's why I. She stopped, suddenly uncertain. Why you what? Isaac prompted gently. Why I appreciate your practical help so much, she finished. James would have had grand visions for this place, but you've shown me how to actually survive here. Isaac's smile was tinged with something like sadness. High praise indeed. As March approached, bringing the first hints of spring, Tabitha found herself thinking of Isaac even when he wasn't present. His visits had become the highlight of her weeks. She caught herself planning what to bake for his next visit, what stories to share, what questions to ask about his ranch. One afternoon, as they walked along the edge of her property checking fence repairs, Tabitha slipped on a patch of ice. Isaac caught her before she fell, strong hands steadying her waist. They froze in that position, suddenly aware of their proximity. "Thank you," Tabitha murmured, making no move to step away. Isaac's eyes searched hers. "Tabitha." The sound of approaching horses interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They separated hastily as two riders appeared, Pastor Whitman and his wife. "Mrs. Turner, Mr. Keller," the pastor called cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the moment he'd interrupted. "Beautiful day, isn't it? Spring is nearly upon us." Tabitha composed herself. "Indeed it is, Pastor. What brings you out this way?" "We're visiting parishioners today," Mrs. Whitman explained, "and delivering invitations to the spring social, first Saturday in April." "A tradition in Ventura," Pastor Whitman added. "Music, dancing, a potluck supper. The whole town attends." He handed them each a small printed invitation. Tabitha accepted hers politely, though the thought of such a festive gathering still made her uncomfortable. After the Whitmans departed, an awkward silence fell between Tabitha and Isaac. "Will you attend?" he finally asked. "I don't think so," she replied. "I haven't been to a dance since before James died," Isaac finished for her. Tabitha nodded, suddenly unable to meet his eyes. "I understand." His voice was carefully neutral. "Well, I should be getting back. The days are growing longer, but there's still work to be done before dark." He left soon after, their earlier moment of connection lost in the wake of the Whitmans' interruption. Tabitha watched him go with a sense of missed opportunity, though she couldn't quite define what had been lost. The next few weeks brought a gradual thawing both of the land and, unexpectedly, of Tabitha's resolve regarding the spring social. Isaac continued his visits, but a certain hesitancy had entered their interactions, as if both were afraid to acknowledge the moment by the fence. Mrs. Peterson, during a chance encounter at the general store, insisted Tabitha must attend the social. "It's time, my dear. No one expects you to mourn forever." Those words echoed in Tabitha's mind as she stood before her trunk, fingers tracing the one nice dress she'd brought to Montana, a deep green wool that James had always admired. She hadn't worn it since before his death, couldn't bear to don something so closely associated with happier times. Yet now she carefully shook it out, inspecting for moth damage. Finding none, she hung it by the window to air out, her decision made. The night of the social arrived clear and mild, stars appearing in a sky still tinged with the last pink glow of sunset. Tabitha dressed with care, arranging her hair more elaborately than she had in months. The woman who stared back from her small mirror was a stranger thinner than she'd been a year ago, but with color in her cheeks and a certain resolution in her gaze. She walked to town alone, her heart pounding with each step. The community hall glowed with lamplight, fiddle music spilling into the street along with laughter and conversation. For a moment, Tabitha hesitated at the door, nearly turning back. Then she squared her shoulders and stepped inside. The room was crowded with familiar faces, many turning in surprise at her entrance. Mrs. Peterson hurried over, enfolding her in a warm embrace. "You came. Oh, my dear, you look lovely." Tabitha accepted the welcome, along with greetings from others who approached. She contributed her apple cake to the laden food table and accepted a cup of punch, standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. Her eyes scanned the room automatically, searching for a tall figure in a familiar hat. She found him across the hall, deep in conversation with Mr. Jenkins. As if sensing her gaze, Isaac looked up, their eyes meeting across the crowded space. He excused himself and made his way toward her, weaving between dancing couples and chatting groups. When he reached her, he stopped a respectful distance away, his expression cautious but pleased. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said. "I surprised myself," she admitted. Isaac glanced at the dancers, then back to her. "Would you care to dance, Tabitha? Only if you want to, of course." She hesitated only briefly. "Yes, I think I would." He led her to the dance floor as the musicians began a waltz. Isaac's hand was warm at her waist, his touch light but secure. They moved together with surprising ease, finding a natural rhythm. "You're a good dancer," Tabitha observed, slightly breathless. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said no girl would marry a man who stepped on her toes." His smile was warm, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Tabitha laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised her with its freedom. "Wise woman, your mother." They danced 2 more dances before taking a break for refreshments. Isaac fetched them each a plate of food, and they found a quiet corner to eat and observe the festivities. Several people stopped to chat briefly, but most gave them space, sensing something developing between them. "I've been thinking about your garden," Isaac said between bites. "The soil near your cabin is good, but it needs enriching after winter. I have some composted manure that would help." Tabitha smiled at his practical turn of mind, always thinking of improvements. "That's the way of ranching, always planning for next season." He paused, setting down his empty plate. "Tabitha, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes." "My land, it's good grazing, plenty of water, but I've neglected the house. It's little more than a cabin now, but with some work, it could be a proper home." His eyes held hers steadily. "Would you consider coming to see it? Sunday after church, perhaps?" The invitation carried weight beyond a simple visit, and they both knew it. This was Isaac offering a glimpse of his future, a future he might be considering sharing. "I'd like that very much," Tabitha replied softly. Relief and pleasure washed across his features. "Good, that's good." As the evening drew to a close, Isaac walked Tabitha home under a canopy of stars. The night was cool but not cold, with the unmistakable scent of spring in the air. They walked closely, their hands occasionally brushing, each contact sending a small thrill through Tabitha. At her porch they lingered, neither quite ready to end the evening. "Thank you for the dances," Isaac said, "and for saying yes to Sunday." "I'm glad I went tonight," Tabitha replied. "It was time." Isaac stepped slightly closer. "Tabitha, I don't want to rush you or presume anything, but I want you to know that He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I care for you more than as a friend or neighbor." The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Tabitha felt a flutter of both fear and hope in her chest. "I care for you too, Isaac," she whispered. "But I'm still finding my way back to myself after James." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know, and I'll wait however long it takes. There's no hurry." Gently, telegraphing his intentions to give her time to withdraw, Isaac leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to her cheek. "Good night, Tabitha." "Good night, Isaac." Inside her cabin, Tabitha touched her fingers to the spot where his lips had been, a small smile playing at her mouth. For the first time in almost a year, she felt something like anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Tabitha wore her green dress again to church, drawing approving glances from the congregation. Isaac sat across the aisle, his eyes finding hers frequently throughout the service. Afterward, he helped her into his wagon for the journey to his ranch. "It's about 5 miles southeast," he explained as they set off. "Not as close to town as your place, but the land is exceptional." The ride took them through rolling hills dotted with new spring growth. As they crested a rise, Isaac reined in the horses, allowing Tabitha to take in the view below. A small valley spread before them, bisected by a clear stream. A simple cabin stood near a cluster of cottonwood trees, with a corral and barn nearby. Cattle grazed on the fresh grass, and in the distance, mountains rose blue against the sky. "It's beautiful," Tabitha breathed, genuine admiration in her voice. Pride shone in Isaac's eyes. 50 acres now, with an option on the adjacent 100. Good water year-round, sheltered from the worst winter storms. He guided the wagon down to the cabin. Up close, Tabitha could see it was indeed basic, similar to her own but larger, built with an eye toward expansion. Inside was sparse but clean, with simple furniture, a stone fireplace and windows positioned to catch the morning and afternoon light. "I built it myself," Isaac explained, a hint of apology in his voice. "Not much to look at yet, but the foundation is solid. I've been saving lumber for additions." Tabitha ran her hand along a window frame, noting the careful craftsmanship. "You've created something wonderful here, Isaac." He showed her the rest of the property, the garden plot he'd prepared but not yet planted, the orchard of young apple trees that would bear fruit in a few years, the spring house where milk and butter stayed cool even in summer. Throughout the tour, he spoke of future improvements, potential developments, long-term plans. "You see things not just as they are, but as they could be," Tabitha observed as they sat by the stream, sharing the picnic lunch she'd prepared. "That's the only way to build something lasting," Isaac replied. "Start with good foundations, then work toward the vision." The parallel to their relationship wasn't lost on Tabitha. Isaac had been patiently laying foundations of trust and friendship, allowing her time to heal while quietly showing her possibilities for the future. "What would you plant in that garden?" she asked, genuinely curious. Isaac's expression brightened. "Practical things first: potatoes, beans, corn. But I've always wanted a proper kitchen garden too, with herbs and flowers. My mother had one back in Ohio." "Flowers are important," Tabitha agreed. "They feed the soul while vegetables feed the body." They spent the afternoon talking of gardens and cattle, house additions and furniture. Practical conversations on the surface, but beneath ran currents of deeper meaning. These were discussions about a shared future, tentative yet increasingly tangible. As the sun began its descent, Isaac reluctantly suggested they head back. "I promise to have you home before dark." During the return journey, Tabitha found herself imagining how it would feel to make this trip in reverse, leaving her small cabin for the last time, bringing her belongings to Isaac's ranch, making his home hers as well. The thought brought not panic but a quiet anticipation. At her cabin, Isaac helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for showing me your ranch," Tabitha said. "It's truly impressive what you've accomplished." "There's still so much to do," he replied. "But knowing what you think matters to me." The air between them hummed with unspoken words. Tabitha gathered her courage. "Isaac, I've been thinking about what you said at the social about waiting. I appreciate your patience more than I can express." She met his gaze directly. "But I don't want either of us to wait forever. Life is too uncertain for that." Hope dawned in his eyes. "What are you saying, Tabitha?" "I'm saying that grief doesn't simply disappear, but it can make room for new feelings. And my feelings for you have grown into something I can no longer ignore." Isaac stepped closer, his expression solemn. "May I kiss you properly, Tabitha, please?" she whispered. His lips met hers gently at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands rested on his chest, feeling his heartbeat accelerate beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, expressing months of restrained emotion. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been falling in love with you since that day in the general store when you dropped your penny," he admitted. Tabitha smiled, joy bubbling up from a place she'd thought permanently sealed. "I've been much slower, I'm afraid, but no less certain now that I'm here." "We'll take it day by day," Isaac promised. "No rushing, no pressure." But the direction was clear to both of them, the path forward suddenly illuminated like a trail in morning sunlight. Spring progressed rapidly, the Montana landscape transforming from brown to vibrant green. Tabitha and Isaac fell into a new rhythm, with him visiting almost daily to help with her garden, share meals, and simply be together. Their relationship blossomed alongside the wildflowers dotting the prairie, natural and inevitable. In late April, Isaac brought up the subject they'd both been circling. "Tabitha, I've been thinking about practical matters." They were sitting on her porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular oranges and pinks. Tabitha's hand was comfortably entwined with his. "You know I appreciate practical matters," she replied with a small smile. "Your cabin needs significant repairs before next winter," he began carefully. "The roof especially won't last another snow season, and my ranch house needs expanding before it's truly comfortable." She waited, sensing more coming. "It seems foolish to invest in two separate properties when—" He took a deep breath. "When I hope we might share one home in the future." Tabitha turned to face him fully. "Are you proposing Isaac Keller?" "Not exactly, not yet." He squeezed her hand. "I want to do that properly when you're ready. What I'm suggesting is a practical timeline. If we were to formalize our relationship by late summer, it would make sense to focus our efforts on one home before winter." His approach, practical yet respectful of her feelings, touched Tabitha deeply. This was so different from her whirlwind courtship with James, which had been full of romantic declarations but short on realistic planning. "And which home would that be?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "My ranch offers more potential," Isaac said. "But this cabin was your beginning in Montana. Whatever you decide, I'll respect." Tabitha considered the small cabin that had sheltered her through grief and healing. She'd come to appreciate its simple comfort, but it held painful memories alongside the good ones. "Your ranch," she decided. "It's where our future would have room to grow." The smile that spread across Isaac's face was worth any sense of loss she might feel at leaving her first Montana home. "I was hoping you'd say that. But I have one condition," she added. "Name it. I want to bring Buttercup." "She was my first friend hereafter." She didn't need to finish the thought. Isaac laughed, relief evident in his voice. Buttercup already has a place waiting in my barn. I built her a stall last week, hoping you'd agree." Tabitha leaned forward and kissed him, a silent affirmation of their path forward. May and June passed in a flurry of activity. Isaac expanded his cabin, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. Tabitha divided her time between tending her garden, the produce would be preserved for their winter stores, and helping with improvements at the ranch. Together, they selected furniture, planned storage, and discussed the arrangement of their future home. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Isaac was patient and considerate, never pushing Tabitha beyond her comfort but making his love increasingly evident. For her part, Tabitha found her heart opening wider, the pain of loss gradually replaced by anticipation of new beginnings. On a perfect evening in early July, Isaac took Tabitha to a hilltop overlooking their ranch. A small table waited, set with a proper cloth and their best dishes, a bouquet of wildflowers at its center. "What's all this?" Tabitha asked, delighted by the surprise. "A proper dinner," Isaac replied, helping her to her seat. "And perhaps more." He served a meal he'd prepared himself, not fancy but thoughtfully made with her favorites. As they ate, they watched the sun begin its descent, casting long shadows across the valley below. After dessert, apple pie from Tabitha's preserved fruit, Isaac reached across the table for her hand. "Tabitha Turner," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "This past year has taught me that life offers no guarantees, but it does offer second chances if we're brave enough to take them." He stood, moving to kneel beside her chair, still holding her hand. "You came to Montana carrying grief I can only imagine, yet you found the strength to build a life alone. I've watched you grow from hollow-eyed sorrow to this beautiful, resilient woman before me now." His free hand produced a small box from his pocket. "I'm asking for the privilege of building the rest of our lives together, as husband and wife. Will you marry me?" The ring inside the box was simple but lovely, a small pearl nestled between two tiny sapphires that matched Isaac's eyes. Tears blurred Tabitha's vision, but these were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Isaac." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her as the setting sun bathed them in golden light. They were married in August in Ventura's white church, the entire town turning out to celebrate. Tabitha wore a new dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from Helena. Isaac stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving his bride as she walked down the aisle. Pastor Whitman spoke of new beginnings and second chances, of love that heals and sustains. Tabitha thought of James briefly during the ceremony, not with sorrow, but with gratitude for the time they'd had and the journey that had led her here. To this man, who had shown her how to see beauty in the world again. Mrs. Peterson dabbed tears throughout the ceremony, later telling anyone who would listen that she'd known all along those two were meant for each other. Mr. Jenkins proudly reminded guests that he'd played a part through the transaction involving Buttercup. The town celebrated with a feast and dancing that lasted well into the night. Afterward, Isaac brought his bride home to their ranch, now officially named the Double K. The cabin had been transformed into a comfortable home, with Tabitha's belongings blended seamlessly with Isaac's. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a new quilt adorned their bed, and a vase of wildflowers welcomed them on the table. "Welcome home, Mrs. Keller," Isaac said, lifting her over the threshold. "Home," Tabitha repeated, savoring the word and all it implied. Their first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges. The work was constant: cattle to tend, gardens to harvest, preparations for winter. But they faced each task together, their partnership extending from home to business seamlessly. When autumn came, they traveled to Helena to secure a loan for expanding their herd. The banker was initially skeptical about lending to a relatively new rancher, but Tabitha's meticulous account books and clear business plan won him over. They returned with funds to purchase 30 additional head of cattle and provisions for their first winter as a married couple. That winter proved milder than the previous one. Yet the long evenings confined to their cabin might have grown tedious without the deep connection they'd formed. They spent hours talking, planning, reading aloud from books Isaac brought from town. They played chess and cards, sang songs from their childhoods, and loved each other with growing passion and tenderness. By spring, two significant developments had occurred. Isaac had acquired the adjacent 100 acres he'd been eyeing, and Tabitha was expecting their first child. The news of the baby brought joy tinged with anxiety. Childbirth on the frontier was risky medical care limited to the skills of Mrs. Peterson and a few other experienced women in Ventura. Isaac worried constantly, insisting Tabitha rest more than she deemed necessary. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she reminded him one day as he tried to take a water bucket from her hands. "Humor me," he replied, kissing her forehead. This miracle deserves every precaution. As Tabitha's body changed, Isaac's protectiveness grew, matched only by his wonder at the life developing within her. At night, he would place his hand on her growing belly, marveling at the movements of their child. "What shall we name him?" Isaac asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Or her. If it's a boy, perhaps William, after your brother," Tabitha suggested softly. "And if a girl, maybe Grace." Isaac's eyes glistened with emotion. "Perfect names, William James or Grace Elizabeth." The middle names, honoring her first husband and his mother, acknowledged the past that had shaped them while embracing their future together. Summer brought relentless heat, and the final months of Tabitha's pregnancy. Her movements slowed, but her spirits remained high. Isaac hired a young man from town to help with ranch work, allowing him to stay closer to home as Tabitha's time approached. On a scorching August day, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Tabitha went into labor. Isaac rode frantically for Mrs. Peterson, returning with her and 2 other women experienced in childbirth. The labor lasted 18 hours. Isaac paced outside, occasionally permitted to enter and hold Tabitha's hand between contractions. As dawn broke the following day, the cry of a healthy baby boy filled their home. "William James Keller," Tabitha whispered exhaustedly as Isaac cradled their son for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect," Isaac managed, overcome with emotion. "You're perfect. I love you both so much." The following years brought growth to both family and ranch. The Double K prospered under their joint management, with Tabitha's head for figures complementing Isaac's practical knowledge of cattle and land. They built a proper house when William was 2, a sprawling single-story home with room for the additional children they hoped would come. Grace Elizabeth arrived when William was 4, a fair-haired girl with her mother's delicate features and her father's determined spirit. 2 years later, twins Michael and Matthew completed their family, bringing joyful chaos to the ranch. As their children grew, Tabitha and Isaac shared with them the story of their beginning, how a penny dropped in a general store led to a fence repair, which led to a cow named Buttercup, which led eventually to love. "Your mother's eyes were so sad when I first met her," Isaac would tell the children, "like she couldn't see anything good in the world anymore. And your father was so patient," Tabitha would continue. "He showed me reasons to see beauty again, one small kindness at a time." On their 10th anniversary, Isaac surprised Tabitha with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their 4 children, to remind you of all the joy that came from taking a chance on a dusty cowboy, he said as he fastened it around her neck. The best chance I ever took, she replied, kissing him with the same tenderness as their first kiss on her porch years ago. That evening, as they sat on the wide veranda of their home watching their children play in the twilight, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The grief that once hollowed her out had not disappeared. She still thought of James occasionally with fond remembrance, but it had transformed into something that added depth to her capacity for joy rather than diminishing it. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Isaac asked, taking her hand. "About how empty my eyes must have been when you first met me," she replied honestly, "and how full my heart is now." Isaac squeezed her hand. "I knew from the moment you looked up from that penny that someday, if I was patient enough, I might be able to help you see the world differently again." "And you did," Tabitha said softly. "One day at a time, one kindness after another, until I could see not just what was lost, but what could still be found." As the Montana sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues, and their children's laughter filled the air, Tabitha Turner Keller thanked whatever fate or providence had brought her to Ventura, and placed a dropped penny in the path of a kind cowboy with patient blue eyes and a heart big enough to wait for hers to heal. The hollow spaces grief had carved within her had not been filled with forgetfulness or replacement, but with new memories, new love, and new reasons to embrace each day with gratitude. In learning to see beauty again through Isaac's eyes, she had discovered her own capacity for second chances, a lesson worth all the pain that had preceded it.